My name is Sadie, and I'm 32 years old. I'm sitting in my small apartment holding a worn leather journal where I've scribbled my dreams since college. 2 years ago, my ex-husband Marcus stood in a crowded courtroom and called me broke and stupid. His words cut deep, echoing every doubt I'd ever had. But he didn't know my secret, the one that turned his smug grin to shock. Want to hear how I proved him wrong? Stick around. Where are you watching from? Hit like, subscribe, and let's dive into this journey together. I sat at our dining table, the one Marcus picked out because it matched his vision of perfect, its dark wood gleaming under the chandelier's glow. The plates were still warm from the oven chicken and roasted potatoes. I'd spent an hour preparing the kitchen heavy with the scent of rosemary. He walked in late tie, loose and smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize, a musky note that clung to his jacket. I was 30. Then still trying to make our marriage work, pouring myself into small gestures like this dinner, hoping they'd bridge the growing gap. The bookstore job I loved felt like a wedge between us, its quiet joy, something he couldn't understand. Marcus set his phone down, screen glowing with a text I wasn't meant to see. Rachel, his colleague. My stomach twisted, a cold knot forming. Dinner smells good, he said, but his tone was flat, like he was checking a box on a list. I smiled, hoping to spark something warm, something like the early days when he'd look at me like I mattered. Long day? I asked, stirring the gravy to keep my hands busy. He shrugged, cutting into his food with quick, distracted slices. Just the usual. Meetings, deals. You wouldn't get it. His words landed like a slap, casual but sharp, slicing through the fragile hope I'd been holding. I gripped my fork tighter, my knuckles paling against the silver. I wanted to tell him about the law school brochure I'd tucked away in my desk, hidden behind old receipts, its glossy pages promising a future I barely dared to imagine. But his eyes were on his phone again, not me, his thumb scrolling through messages that weren't mine. I tried to change the subject, my voice softer than I meant it to be. The bookstore's busy this week. We got a new shipment of novels and I'm leading a reading group. His fork paused midair, and he looked at me, his brows raised in that way that made me feel small. Sadie, come on. You're smarter than stacking books all day. Why don't you do something real? His voice carried that edge, the one that turned my pride into shame. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, the gravy cooling in its bowl. I like my job, I said softly, almost a whisper. He snorted, a sound that echoed in the quiet dining room. It's not about liking it. It's about ambition. You're wasting your potential. I stared at my plate, the potatoes suddenly unappetizing, their edges blurring as my eyes stung. I thought about the law school application I'd started filling out, the one I hadn't told him about, because I knew he'd laugh, his voice sharp with dismissal. Marcus always had a way of making my dreams feel small, like they didn't belong in his world of shiny cars and big commissions, where success was measured in dollars and status. I wanted to argue, to tell him I was more than he saw, that I was capable of more than he'd ever believe, but the words stuck tangled in my throat. Instead, I said, maybe I'll think about it. He didn't look up, just nodded, his attention back on his phone. You're not cut out for that kind of pressure, Sadie. Trust me. The next day at the bookstore, I was restocking shelves, the scent of paper and ink, a quiet comfort. Tessa, my coworker, noticed my quiet mood, her eyes catching mine as she dusted a display. She was older, with a kind smile and a habit of asking questions that cut through my defenses, like she could see the weight I carried. You okay, Sadie? You seem off. I hesitated, my fingers lingering on a hardcover's spine, then told her about Marcus's comments, the way his words had made my dreams feel like childish scribbles. She leaned against a shelf, her eyes soft but serious, her apron slightly crooked. I was married once, she said. He didn't think I was enough either. Leaving him was the best thing I ever did. It's hard, but you find yourself again. Her words hit me hard, like a door cracking open, letting in a sliver of light. I wanted to ask more, to understand how she'd found the courage, but a customer interrupted, and I was left with her story echoing in my head, a seed planted in the cracks of my doubt. That night I sat at my desk, the house quiet, except for Marcus's snoring from the bedroom, a low rumble that felt like another wall between us. I pulled out the law school brochure, its pages worn from my nervous fingers, the edges curling slightly. The words application deadline stared back at me, a challenge and a promise bold and unyielding. I started typing, my heart racing with a mix of fear and hope, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the wall. Marcus's voice lingered, telling me I wasn't enough, but Tessa's words pushed back a quiet rebellion in my chest. I wasn't ready to give up on myself, not yet. But as I saved my application, I heard his car pull into the driveway, its engine cutting through the silence, and my courage faltered. What if he was right? What if I was chasing something I'd never reach? I closed my laptop, heart still pounding as Marcus's footsteps echoed up the stairs, heavy and uneven. I shoved the law school brochure under a stack of bills, my hands shaky, the papers rustling like dry leaves. The bedroom door creaked open and I forced a smile, hoping he wouldn't notice my flushed cheeks or the way my eyes darted to the desk. He didn't. He just tossed his jacket on a chair, its fabric crumpled, and muttered about a bad deal at work, his voice rough with frustration. I nodded, pretending to listen, my fingers still tingling from the application I'd just submitted. My mind was on those words I'd typed in secret, each one a defiance of his doubt. Could I really do this? Could I step into a life he'd never seen for me? The next weekend, Marcus's parents invited us to their annual barbecue, a sprawling event in their backyard with string lights casting a warm glow over the manicured lawn. I wore a simple sundress, its hem brushing my knees, feeling out of place among his family's polished chatter, their voices bright with talk of vacations and investments. Marcus was in his element, charming everyone, his arm around me like a prop in a play I hadn't auditioned for. I tried to join in complimenting his mother Diane's garden, the roses vibrant against the fence, but she gave me a tight smile, her eyes flicking to Marcus as if I were an afterthought, a guest who'd overstayed. As we sat around the picnic table piled with ribs and coleslaw, the air thick with the smell of charcoal, Marcus's sister Harper leaned forward, her wineglass catching the light. "So Sadie," she said, her voice sharp like a blade hidden in silk, still at the bookstore. "Must be nice just reading all day." The table quieted, forks pausing, eyes turning to me. My cheeks burned, the heat creeping up my neck. "It's more than that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, my hands smoothing the napkin in my lap. "I'm helping customers running events." Harper smirked, her lips curling. "Sure, but it's not exactly a career, is it? Marcus needs someone who can keep up." Laughter rippled, light but cutting, and Marcus didn't correct her. He just sipped his beer, avoiding my gaze, his silence louder than her words. I stared at the tablecloth, its checkered pattern blurring as my fingers twisted the napkin into knots. Diane glanced at me, her expression softening for a moment, like she might say something, but she turned away, busying herself with a platter. I wanted to scream, to tell them about the law school application I'd submitted, about the dreams I'd buried, to make Marcus happy, the ones I'd hidden to avoid his judgment. But my throat closed up, and all I managed was a weak, "I like my work." Harper rolled her eyes, a quick flick that felt like a dismissal, and the conversation moved on, leaving me invisible, a ghost at their table. Later, as I helped clear plates, the clink of dishes sharp in the evening air, Diane pulled me aside near the garden shed. "Don't mind Harper," she whispered, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "She's protective of Marcus." Her words were kind, but they stung like I was the outsider who needed pity, not family. I knotted my chest tight and escaped to the garden, pretending to admire the roses, their petals soft in the fading light. Alone, I let the tears come hot and silent, tracing paths down my cheeks. I thought of Tessa's story, how she'd walked away from someone who made her feel small, her courage a beacon I couldn't yet reach. Could I do that? I wasn't sure, my hands trembling as I clutched a rose stem, careful not to prick my fingers. Back home, I confronted Marcus in our living room, the air heavy with the scent of his cologne, a lingering reminder of his distance. "Why didn't you say anything when Harper tore into me?" I asked, my voice shaking, the words spilling out before I could stop them. He sighed, loosening his tie, his movements slow and deliberate. "You're too sensitive, Sadie. It was just a joke. Don't make it a thing." His dismissal hit harder than Harper's words, a weight that settled in my bones. I stood there searching his face for the man I'd married, the one who'd once promised to stand by me. But all I saw was indifference, his eyes already drifting back to his phone. That night I lay awake, the weight of his family's judgment pressing down on me heavier than ever. I wasn't just fighting Marcus now. I was fighting the version of myself he'd convinced me I was a shadow I didn't recognize. I stood in our kitchen, the clock ticking past midnight, its soft clicks filling the silence. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, the granite cold against my palms grounding me as my thoughts spiraled. Marcus was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. The sting of Harper's words at the barbecue still burned sharp and unrelenting, but it was his silence that cut deeper, a betrayal that felt personal, deliberate. I'd spent weeks wrestling with my law school application, hiding it like a guilty secret, the act of applying a quiet rebellion against his doubt. Now I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I needed to know if we were still a team, if there was anything left to salvage. Marcus. I said, my voice low but steady, cutting through the hum of the refrigerator. He didn't look up, just grunted, his thumb still moving across the screen. About what? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, the air feeling thinner. About us. About how you let your family treat me like I'm nothing. He finally set his phone down, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. Sadie, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just how they are. Why do you care so much? His tone was sharp, like I was the problem, like my hurt was an inconvenience. I stepped closer, my hands trembling, my voice rising despite myself. I care because I'm your wife, because I'm trying to build something for myself and you act like it's a joke. His eyes narrowed further and he stood towering over me, his presence filling the room. Build something, Sadie. You work at a bookstore. You're not exactly pulling your weight here. My chest tightened like the air had been sucked out of the room, his words a hammer against my resolve. I wanted to tell him about the law school acceptance letter tucked in my drawer, its envelope crisp and unopened, but his words stopped me cold, freezing my courage. Pulling my weight, I repeated, my voice shaking, barely holding together. I've been supporting you, keeping this house together while you're out with Rachel. His face froze, a flicker of guilt crossing his eyes, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. I hadn't meant to say her name, but it slipped out raw and jagged like a splinter breaking free. He laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed off the kitchen tiles. You're paranoid. Rachel's just a colleague. But you know what? Maybe I need someone who gets my world. Someone who's not stuck in a dead-end job. My knees felt weak, but I stood my ground, my hands clenching into fists. You want a divorce, don't you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the words heavy with a truth I wasn't ready to face. He didn't answer right away, just stared at me, his eyes hard, unyielding. Maybe I do, he said finally, his voice low and final. You're holding me back, Sadie. Financially, socially, all of it. I can't keep carrying you. The words landed like a punch, stealing my breath, each syllable a confirmation of what I'd feared. I thought of the years I'd spent trying to please him, dimming my own light to fit his life, rearranging myself to fit his vision. I turned away, my vision blurring with tears, and walked to the bedroom, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood. My hands shook as I opened my drawer, pulling out the acceptance letter from the law school, its paper smooth under my fingers. It was my lifeline, proof I was more than he thought, a secret I'd guarded like a fragile flame. But as I held it, Marcus's voice echoed in my head, telling me I'd never be enough. His words a relentless drumbeat. I sank onto the bed, the paper crumpling in my hands, its edges digging into my skin. My brother Lucas's words from a recent call came back to me, his voice steady despite his own battles. You're stronger than you know, he'd said, his own struggles with our father's expectations making him see mine. But right now, I didn't feel strong. I felt broken, the letter in my hands, a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. The next morning I called Lucas, my voice thick with unshed tears, the phone cold against my ear. He wants a divorce, I said, the words tasting like ash, bitter and final. Lucas was quiet for a moment. the line crackling softly. Then he said, "Sadie, you don't need him. You never did." His belief in me was a flicker of light, a candle in a storm. But Marcus's betrayal loomed larger, its shadow swallowing everything else. I hung up staring at the letter still clutched in my hand, its words blurring through my tears. I'd been accepted to law school, a dream I'd fought for in secret, but Marcus's words made me doubt I could do it. The fight wasn't over, but I was already bruised and the worst was yet to come, a weight I could feel gathering on the horizon. I sat in the courtroom, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the wooden bench cold beneath me, its surface worn smooth by countless others before me. The air was thick with the murmur of strangers, their eyes darting toward me like I was a spectacle, a story to whisper about later. Marcus stood across the room, his suit crisp, his posture radiating confidence as if he'd already scripted the outcome. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed man with a briefcase that screamed money, laid out papers that painted me as a burden, a nobody leeching off Marcus's success. I felt my pulse hammering, each word tightening the knot in my chest, a coil of anger and shame I could barely contain. The lawyer's voice was smooth, cutting each syllable polished to wound. My client has been the sole provider while Ms. Sadie contributes minimally with her bookstore job. He paused, letting the words sink in, and I saw Marcus smirk, a flash of teeth that made my stomach churn, a visceral twist of betrayal. "She has no assets, no ambition?" The lawyer continued, his tone dripping with disdain. Then Marcus leaned forward, his voice loud enough for the room to hear, slicing through the murmurs. "She's broke and stupid. She'll never win this." Laughter rippled through his side of the gallery, sharp and cruel. Like needles in my skin, each chuckle a reminder of my place in his world. I stared at the floor, my cheeks burning, the weight of every gaze pressing down on me, heavy as a physical force. My law school acceptance letter was tucked in my bag, its presence a secret I hadn't dared reveal, but I couldn't speak, couldn't move my body, frozen by the weight of their judgment. The judge, an older woman with a stern face and glasses perched low, scribbled notes, her pen scratching like an accusation, each stroke amplifying my silence. I wanted to stand, to scream that I wasn't what they thought, that I had dreams and a degree they'd never seen, but my voice was gone, swallowed by shame. Marcus's words echoing in my head like a relentless taunt. I glanced at Harper in the gallery, her arms crossed, a satisfied glint in her eyes. Her lips curved in a way that felt like victory. She'd been whispering to friends, spreading stories that I was lazy, that I'd trapped Marcus into a marriage. He regretted her words, reaching me through a mutual acquaintance like poison seeping through cracks. My hands clenched, nails digging into my palms, drawing tiny crescents of pain as I fought the urge to run, to escape the eyes and the laughter. I thought of Lucas, how he'd told me to hold on his voice, a lifeline from our last call. But it felt so far away now, drowned out by the noise of this room. The lawyer handed the judge a document claiming I'd mismanaged our joint account, a lie that made my breath catch sharp and sudden. Marcus had hidden money, moved it to accounts I couldn't touch. His betrayal, not just emotional, but calculated, deliberate. I had no proof yet, my nights of searching bank statements yielding only fragments. I sat there frozen as the judge's eyes flicked over the paper, her expression unreadable, her silence a wall I couldn't climb. "We'll review these claims," she said, her voice neutral. But it felt like a door slamming shut, locking me in place. Marcus leaned back, his smirk widening as if he'd already won his confidence, a blade twisting deeper. I left the courtroom, my legs shaky, the hallway blurring through tears I refused to let fall, their heat stinging my eyes. Outside, the air was cold, biting my skin through my thin coat, but it couldn't match the chill inside me, a hollow ache that spread through my chest. I pulled my coat tighter, thinking of Tessa's advice to fight for myself, her words a faint echo against Marcus's cruelty. But all I could hear was his voice calling me stupid, worthless, each word a stone piling onto my shoulders. The world felt like it was closing in, and I wasn't sure I could keep standing. My bag, heavy with that hidden letter, felt like the only thing keeping me tethered. But even that wasn't enough to silence the doubt screaming in my head, a cacophony of fear and failure that threatened to drown me. The courtroom felt smaller today, the walls closing in as I sat at the defendant's table, my hands sweaty against the cheap fabric of my skirt, its navy weave fraying slightly at the hem. It was a follow-up hearing, and the air was thick with tension, the kind that hums like a live wire. Marcus sat across from me, his eyes glinting with that same smug certainty, like he'd already won his tie perfectly knotted, a stark contrast to my trembling hands. His lawyer, Mr. Coleman, shuffled papers, ready to bury me again, his confidence a palpable force. But I wasn't the same woman from last time. I'd spent nights digging through bank statements, piecing together proof of Marcus's lies, my desk littered with coffee cups and highlighters. My law degree earned in secret was my shield, and I clutched my bag, feeling the weight of the folder inside its edges worn from my anxious handling. The judge called the session to order, her voice sharp, cutting through the hum of the room like a blade through silk. Mr. Coleman stood adjusting his tie and began his attack, his words precise and practiced. Your Honor, we've established Ms. Sadie's lack of contribution. Today will show she has no claim to my client's assets. I felt my pulse spike, a rapid thud against my ribs, but I kept my face steady, remembering Professor Nora's words from law school. Stay calm, let the truth speak. She was here today, sitting in the back, her gray hair catching the light, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. Then it happened. Mr. Coleman opened my file, expecting to find nothing but his own narrative, his fingers flipping through pages with practiced ease. His eyes scanned the page, and his confident smirk faltered a crack in his polished facade. He flipped to the next document, then froze, his hand hovering. Your Honor, he stammered, his voice catching, there seems to be a discrepancy. He held up a certificate, my law degree from Georgetown, earned through late-night classes, while Marcus thought I was just at the bookstore, oblivious to my double life. The room went silent, the air heavy with shock, a collective holding of breath. I felt my heart pound, a mix of fear and triumph, like standing on the edge of a cliff. Marcus's head snapped toward me, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. What is this? He muttered loud enough for me to hear, his voice edged with panic. I met his gaze, my voice steady, despite the storm inside, a whirlwind of nerves and resolve. It's my law degree, Marcus. I've been practicing part-time for a year. The words felt like a release, like I'd been holding my breath for years, each syllable a step out of his shadow. The gallery murmured, a wave of whispers breaking the silence, and I saw Harper's jaw drop, her usual sneer replaced by a stunned gape. Even the judge leaned forward, her pen pausing mid-air, her glasses glinting as she studied me. Mr. Coleman tried to recover, his voice rising a touch too shrill. This doesn't change her financial dependency, Your Honor. But the judge raised a hand, silencing him, her movement sharp and final. Ms. Sadie, she said, her eyes locking onto mine, steady and searching. Can you confirm this? I stood, my legs trembling, but my voice clear, each word deliberate. Yes, Your Honor. I graduated 2 years ago. I've been working cases pro bono, building my practice. My words hung in the air, each one a brick dismantling Marcus's lies, a structure I'd watched him build around me for years. I felt Nora's proud nod from the back, like a spark igniting my courage, a warmth spreading through me. But Marcus wasn't done. He leaned toward his lawyer, his face red, and hissed. She's lying. She's not a lawyer. This is a trick. His voice carried desperate and unhinged, and the room turned to him, a ripple of attention shifting. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a raw, aching anger, a fire kindled by years of his dismissal. He'd spent years convincing me I was nothing, and now faced with the truth, he was scrambling his control, slipping like sand through his fingers. I wanted to scream, to lay every betrayal bare, to show the world the man behind the charm, but I held back, knowing the real fight was coming. The judge's gavel hovered, and I braced myself, the air crackling with what was about to unfold, a storm I'd summoned but couldn't yet control. The judge's eyes narrowed, fixed on Marcus, as his accusation hung in the air, a desperate plea that only deepened the silence. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it might burst, each beat echoing the years I'd spent hiding my truth, burying it under his expectations. Mr. Coleman scrambled, flipping through his notes with a frantic edge, but the damage was done, his confidence unraveling. The courtroom buzzed, a low hum of disbelief, like a hive waking up. I stood frozen, my blazer suddenly feeling too tight, its seams pressing into my shoulders as every face turned toward me, their eyes no longer mocking, but curious, uncertain. Then Marcus stood his chair, scraping the floor, a harsh sound that cut through the murmurs, his voice sharp and desperate. "She's not a lawyer," he spat, pointing at me, his finger trembling slightly. "She's making this up to embarrass me." The words sliced through me, not because they hurt, but because they were so predictable, a script I'd heard in my head for years. I saw Rachel, his new girlfriend, in the gallery. Her face flushed with secondhand shame, her lips pressed tight. She shifted in her seat, her eyes avoiding mine, and I realized she'd believed his lies about me too, swallowed his story whole. The judge banged her gavel, silencing Marcus, the sound sharp and final. But he kept going, his voice rising, cracking at the edges. "Your Honor, she's been nothing but a burden. She's faking this to steal what's mine." My stomach churned, a wave of nausea hitting me as his words painted me as a fraud in front of everyone, a caricature of the woman I'd fought to become. I wanted to speak, to lay out the truth, to let the room see the years I'd spent studying in secret, but my throat tightened, my breath, shallow, caught in a vice of fear and fury. The judge turned to me, her expression unreadable, her glasses catching the courtroom's fluorescent glow. "Ms. Sadie, do you have documentation to support your claim?" My hands shook as I reached for my bag, pulling out a folder with my law school transcript and a letter from my pro bono firm, its letterhead crisp and official. I handed it to the bailiff, my fingers brushing the paper like it was my last lifeline, its weight grounding me. The judge skimmed it, her face still a mask, and I felt the weight of every doubt Marcus had planted in me, each one a seed that had grown into this moment. Then Mr. Coleman, his voice strained, tried to pivot, his words stumbling. "Your Honor, even if this is true, it doesn't change the financial picture. My client's assets were earned solely by him." But I'd been ready for this, my nights of preparation fueling me. I slid another document across the table, my hands steadier now, the paper smooth under my fingers. "These are bank statements." I said, my voice low but clear, each word deliberate. "They show Marcus transferred funds to hidden accounts during our marriage." The room gasped, a sharp intake of air that made my skin prickle, a collective shock rippling through the gallery. Marcus's face went white, his hands clenching the table's edge, his knuckles stark against the wood. Harper stood up in the gallery, her voice shrill, cutting through the tension. "That's a lie. She's trying to ruin him," the judge snapped. "Sit down or you'll be removed." Her tone like steel. Harper sank back, her eyes blazing, her face a mask of fury, and I felt a twisted satisfaction mixed with grief, a pang for the family I'd once tried to belong to. This was my family, or what was left of it, tearing itself apart in front of strangers. Rachel stood abruptly, her purse clutched to her chest, and stormed out, her heels clicking like gunfire on the tiled floor, each step a rejection of Marcus's crumbling narrative. Marcus watched her go, his confidence crumbling, but he turned back to me, his eyes burning with something darker than anger, a mix of fear and defiance I'd never seen before. I met his gaze, my chest aching with the weight of his betrayal, not just today, but every day he'd made me feel small, every moment he'd dismissed my dreams. The judge was still reviewing my documents, the silence stretching like a tightrope, taut and unforgiving. I felt exposed, raw, every wound laid bare for strangers to judge, their whispers a background hum that made my skin crawl. My victory was close, but it didn't feel like one, not yet. All I could feel was the hollow ache of a life I'd tried to save, now shattered beyond repair, with no way back, the pieces scattered across this courtroom floor. Months had passed since the courtroom showdown, and I was in my new apartment, a small one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall, its red texture catching the dawn's light. The silence was a relief after Marcus's chaos, a quiet I was learning to embrace. I sat at my kitchen table now, my makeshift desk surrounded by case files for my pro bono clients, their stories written in neat folders. My law degree hung on the wall, its frame catching the morning light, a quiet reminder of what I'd fought for, its glass polished to a shine. I was 32, starting over, and for the first time I felt like I was building something mine, a life carved from my own choices. I'd thrown myself into work taking on cases for women who reminded me of myself. People the world had written off, their voices silenced by doubt or cruelty. My latest client, Mia, was a single mom escaping a controlling ex, her eyes carrying the same fear I'd once known. Helping her felt like helping the version of me who'd sat silent under Marcus's scorn, the one who'd believed she was less. I spent hours drafting motions, my laptop glowing late into the night, its hum a steady companion. Each word I typed felt like a step away from the woman he'd called broke and stupid, a path I was paving with every case I took. That morning I was preparing for Mia's custody hearing when my phone buzzed, its screen lighting up the dim room. It was Tessa, my friend from the bookstore, now my biggest cheerleader, her voice a constant in my new life. "You're doing incredible things, Sadie," she said, her voice warm like a hug through the phone. "I saw your name in a legal aid newsletter. You're making a difference." I smiled, my chest swelling, the warmth spreading through me, but doubt crept in a familiar shadow. Was I really enough? I thought of Professor Nora's advice, own your truth. I wanted to, but Marcus's voice still lingered, whispering I'd fail a ghost I couldn't fully banish. I pushed it aside and drove to the community center, where I'd started mentoring, the building's brick facade worn but welcoming. The room was filled with women, some younger, some older, all carrying their own scars, their chairs arranged in a loose circle. I stood at the front, my hands steady as I shared a piece of my story. Not the courtroom drama, but the quiet nights. I doubted myself, the moments I'd felt invisible. "You don't have to let someone else define you," I said, my voice soft but firm, carrying a conviction I was still growing into. A woman in the back, her eyes tired but bright, nodded slowly, and I felt a spark of connection, a thread tying us together. After the session, Mia stayed behind, clutching a worn notebook, its cover frayed at the edges. "I got my kids back today," she said, her voice breaking, tears glistening in her eyes. "Because of you." She hugged me, her arms tight, and I felt tears prick my eyes, a warmth spreading through me. Her gratitude was a mirror reflecting the strength I was still learning to see in myself, a strength I doubted for so long. But as I drove home, a familiar fear gnawed at me, a whisper of uncertainty. What if I wasn't ready for bigger cases, bigger risks? I parked, staring at my degree on the wall, its frame a quiet beacon, and felt a quiet resolve growing, a seed taking root. I wasn't done fighting, not for Mia, not for these women, not for me. I was wiping down my kitchen table, the scent of lemon cleaner sharp in the air, cutting through the stillness of my apartment. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, its buzz startling me in the quiet. My heart skipped, expecting another case update, my mind already racing through legal strategies. But the message was from Marcus. "Can we talk? I'm sorry." My thumb hovered over the reply button, a flicker of the old me wanting to hear him out, to believe in the man I'd once loved. But I set the phone down, my jaw tight, my resolve hardening. I'd spent too long chasing his approval, rearranging myself to fit his world. That part of me was gone, buried under the weight of my own choices. I walked to the coffee shop down the street, the one with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu scrawled with daily specials, its warmth a contrast to the chill outside. Marcus was already there, sitting by the window, his usual polish faded, his posture slouched. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes tired shadows pooling beneath them. I slid into the seat across from him, my posture straight, my hands steady on the table's worn surface. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, my voice calm but unyielding, a tone I'd practiced in my head. He leaned forward, his fingers tapping the table, a nervous rhythm. "I messed up, Sadie. I didn't see you. I want to fix this." His words stirred something in me, not hope, but a quiet anger tempered by a clarity I'd fought to earn. "Fix this," I said, my tone, even each word measured. "You called me broke and stupid in front of a courtroom. You hid money, lied about me. There's no fixing that." He flinched, his hands stilling, his eyes searching mine for a crack in my resolve. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "I'm struggling now, Sadie. Rachel left. My deals are falling through. I need you." His vulnerability was new, disarming, a glimpse of a man I'd rarely seen, but I saw it for what it was, a plea for control, not love, a last grasp at the power he'd lost. I leaned back, studying him, my fingers tracing the edge of my coffee cup, its ceramic cool against my skin. The coffee shop hummed around us, the clink of cups and soft chatter grounding me, a reminder of the world I'd built. "You don't need me, Marcus," I said. "You need the version of me you created, the one who stayed quiet. I'm not her anymore." His eyes widened, searching mine, but I held his gaze, unflinching, my heart steady. I thought of Mia's gratitude, Tessa's belief in me, the women at the community center who looked to me for strength. They saw me truly, saw me in a way he never had, their faith a mirror to my own. I stood smoothing my sweater, my movements deliberate, each gesture a reclaiming of my space. "Don't contact me again," I said, my voice soft but final, a line drawn in the sand. I walked out, the bell above the door jingling as it closed behind me, a sharp, clean sound. The street was alive with evening bustle, vendors calling out, headlights cutting through the dusk, but I felt a stillness inside, like a weight lifting. I passed a bookstore, its window glowing with new releases, their covers vibrant and inviting, and I smiled, thinking of Tessa's dream to open her own, a dream I'd helped spark. My steps felt lighter, my purpose clearer. I reached into my bag, touching the edge of a new case file I'd taken on, one that felt bigger than anything I'd done before, its weight a promise of what was to come. I wasn't just fighting for others now. I was fighting for the woman I'd always been, the one I was finally becoming. I stood in the courtroom, the polished wood of the witness stand cool under my fingertips, its grain smooth from years of use. It was a new case, a pro bono fight for a client named Mia, whose ex had tried to strip her of everything: her kids, her home, her dignity. But today felt different, bigger, like the air itself was charged with possibility. My victory in this hearing wasn't just for her. It was proof I was rewriting my story line by line. The judge ruled in Mia's favor, granting her full custody and financial support, her voice steady as she read the decision. The room was quiet, but I felt the weight of every eye on me, no longer judging, but watching in awe, their silence a testament to what I'd done. As I gathered my papers, my briefcase heavy with notes, a senior partner from a small firm approached, her suit sharp, her handshake firm, her eyes assessing but warm. "Sadie, your work here was impressive," she said, her voice low but clear. "We're looking for someone like you. Partnership potential." My breath caught a rush of pride mixing with disbelief, a warmth spreading through my chest. Partnership me. I nodded, my voice steady as I thanked her, but inside my heart raced a wild rhythm of possibility. I'd gone from Marcus's shadow to a name people respected, a shift I could still hardly believe. Outside, I met Lucas for lunch at a diner, the smell of coffee and fries grounding me, the vinyl booths creaking under us. He grinned, his eyes bright, his flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves. "You're killing it, Sadie," he said, sliding a milkshake across the table, its glass sweating in the warm air. "I knew you had it in you." His words warmed me, but they also stirred a memory of our father who'd always favored Marcus, calling me too soft for ambition, his voice a judgment I'd carried for years. Lucas had fought that same judgment, his own battles with our father's expectations mirroring mine, and now he was here cheering me on, his pride a quiet strength. We clinked glasses, a silent promise to keep fighting, the sound of glass on glass, a small celebration. But as I left the diner, the sun low and golden, a text from an old friend stopped me cold, my phone buzzing in my pocket. "Heard about your win. Marcus is telling people you set him up." My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with a dull ache, a reminder of his reach. I'd walked away from him at the coffee shop, cut him off, but he was still out there spinning lies, his words like tendrils trying to pull me back. I slipped my phone into my pocket, refusing to reply, my fingers brushing the leather of my bag. I'd spent too long letting his words define me, letting them shape my reflection. Not anymore. Back at my apartment, I opened a package from Professor Nora, a handwritten note tucked inside, its ink blue and steady. "You found your voice, Sadie. Keep using it." Her words sank deep, a quiet validation that made my eyes sting, a warmth that settled in my chest. I set the note on my desk next to Mia's case file, its pages marked with my handwriting, and felt a shift inside me, a turning of the tide. But as I looked out my window, the city lights blurring into a soft glow, a shadow of doubt lingered, a whisper of what might come. Marcus's lies were spreading, and I wondered how far they'd reach, how much they'd still hurt their weight, a ghost I couldn't fully shake. I walked through the park near my apartment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. My shoes crunched on gravel, each step deliberate, as I tried to shake Marcus's latest lie, the text from my friend still burning in my mind. I'd started a blog to share my story, hoping to inspire others, a small corner of the internet where I could speak my truth. The response had been overwhelming, comments from women who'd felt invisible, who thanked me for speaking up their words, a chorus of support that lifted me. But this morning a new comment had appeared, anonymous but sharp, its tone biting. "You're just showing off, tearing a good man down." My hands tightened around my coffee cup, the warmth doing little to ease the chill inside, a cold that settled in my bones. I stopped by a bench, setting my cup down, its steam curling in the air, and opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the fading light. The blog's dashboard showed hundreds of supportive messages, each one a reminder of why I'd started this, but that one comment burned brighter, its words like a splinter under my skin. I knew it was Marcus, or someone close to him, maybe Harper, trying to pull me back into his narrative to make me small again. I closed the laptop, my breath shallow, the park's quiet beauty at odds with the storm inside me. I'd walked away from him, built a life, but his shadow still crept in uninvited, a reminder of the battle I'd thought I'd won. Tessa met me at the park, her scarf bright against the gray sky, her steps quick as she approached. "You saw the comment, didn't you?" she asked, sitting beside me, her voice gentle but knowing. I nodded, my throat tight, the words hard to form. "It's him, Tessa. Or Harper. They can't let me go." She sighed, her eyes soft but fierce, her hands clasped in her lap. "You're bigger than their noise, Sadie. Look at what you're doing." She gestured to my bag where my next case file peeked out, its edges worn from my handling. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt was heavy like a stone in my chest, pressing down with every breath. As we walked the park's paths winding under bare trees, Tessa told me about her plans to open a bookstore, her voice alive with a dream she'd once buried, her eyes bright with possibility. "You inspired me," she said, squeezing my arm, her touch warm through my coat. "Watching you fight it made me want to try." Her words landed softly, a reminder of the ripple I'd started, the lives I'd touched without realizing. But when I got home, I found a letter in my mailbox, no return address, its envelope plain and unassuming. Inside was a single line typed, "You'll never outrun what you did to him." My hands shook as I read it, the paper crumpling, its edges sharp against my fingers. I sat on my couch, the room dim, the letter on the coffee table like a silent accusation, its presence a weight I couldn't ignore. I thought of Lucas's pride, Nora's note, Mia's gratitude, but they felt distant now, like stars obscured by clouds. The world I'd built was real, its foundation solid, but so was the weight of Marcus's lies, spreading like ink in water, tainting the edges of my peace. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my breath slow and heavy, each inhale a struggle against the doubt. I'd fought so hard to stand tall, but tonight I felt the ground shift beneath me, pulling me into a quiet, aching void, a place where the past still whispered, refusing to let go. I stood at the front of the community center, the room warm with the hum of voices, the scent of coffee lingering from a pot in the corner. The women around me sat in a circle, their faces a mix of hope and weariness, each carrying a story heavier than the last, their hands clutching notebooks or tissues. I was 32, leading my first workshop, sharing what I'd learned about starting over, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, but the space felt alive, like we were building something together, a fragile but real community. I spoke about resilience, about choosing yourself when no one else does, my words, drawn from nights I'd spent rebuilding myself. Their nods felt like a quiet promise, a shared understanding that bound us. One woman Clara stayed, after her hands twisting a tissue, its edges fraying as she spoke. "I left my husband last month," she said, her voice low, trembling with a mix of fear and relief. "Your story gave me courage." She handed me a handmade bracelet woven with thin blue threads, its texture rough but warm. I slipped it on my wrist, feeling lighter than it should, the gesture carrying more weight than its simple design. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching a lump rising in my throat. Her gratitude was a mirror reflecting a version of me I was still getting to know, a woman who could inspire, who could stand tall. Driving home, I passed a street market, its stalls bright with fresh flowers and baked goods, the air rich with the scent of lavender and yeast. I stopped, drawn to the vibrancy, and bought a small bouquet of daisies, their white petals soft and unassuming. They reminded me of my mother's garden, a place I hadn't thought of in years, its rows of blooms, a quiet rebellion against the chaos of our childhood. She died when I was young, but her quiet strength had always stayed with me, a whisper I'd ignored under Marcus's shadow. Now, holding those flowers, I felt her closer, like she was cheering me on, her presence a soft echo in my chest. At my apartment, I set the daisies in a glass vase, their petals bright against the plain walls, a splash of color in my small world. I thought of Clara's bracelet, Mia's gratitude, Tessa's dream, each a thread in the tapestry I was weaving. These women were my new anchors, not Marcus's family or his lies, their faith in me a steadying force. But as I sat on my couch, the letter from my mailbox flashed in my mind, its words like a bruise, tender and persistent. I pushed it away, focusing on the bracelet, its threads soft under my fingers, a reminder of what I'd built. I was building something real, but the past still lingered, a faint hum. I couldn't quite silence a shadow at the edge of my vision. I opened my laptop, the blog's dashboard glowing with new comments, each one a voice reaching out across the distance. One stood out from a woman named Lily. "Your words saved me today." I smiled, my chest loosening, the warmth of her words easing the ache. The doubts were still there, but they were quieter now, drowned out by the voices of those I'd helped, their stories intertwining with mine. I leaned back, the room still, the daisies catching the last of the daylight. Their simplicity, a quiet beauty. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, breathing a little slower, a little deeper, the world no longer pressing in but opening up. I sat on my balcony, the night air cool against my skin, a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands, its steam rising in delicate curls. The city hummed below, a soft pulse of life that felt distant yet comforting, a rhythm I was learning to match. I was 32, and for the first time I wasn't running from anything, not Marcus, not his family's judgment, not my own doubts, each one a weight I'd carried too long. I thought of the workshop, Clara's bracelet, Lily's comment on my blog, each a marker of the life I'd built. These were my new roots, fragile but growing, anchoring me to a life I'd chosen, a life that felt like home. I pulled out my journal, its pages worn but familiar, the leather soft under my fingers. I flipped to a blank one, the paper crisp and waiting, and my pen hovered, its tip grazing the page. Then I wrote words I hadn't dared before. I forgive myself. Not Marcus, not yet. Maybe never, but me, for every moment I'd let his words define me, for every time I doubted my own worth. The act felt small, but it carried the weight of years, like shedding a coat I'd worn too long, its fabric heavy with memories I no longer needed. I closed the journal, my fingers tracing its spine, and felt a quiet shift inside, a settling of something long restless. Lucas called as I sat there, his voice steady through the phone, a familiar anchor in the quiet night. Dad reached out. He said, his tone careful but warm. "He wants to see us. Said he's proud of you." I froze, the old ache of our father's dismissal flaring briefly, a memory of his voice calling me weak, unworthy. But I exhaled, letting it go, the air cool in my lungs. "Maybe one day," I said, my voice soft, steady. "But I'm okay now." Lucas laughed, a sound full of warmth, like a fire on a cold night. "You always were, Sadie." His words settled over me like a blanket. I didn't know I needed, a comfort I hadn't realized I'd earned. I stood leaning against the balcony railing, the stars faint above the city glow, their light a quiet promise. The letter from Marcus's world. Those anonymous words meant to wound, sat in a drawer now untouched, its power fading. I didn't need to read it again, didn't need to let it pull me back. I thought of Tessa's bookstore dream, Mia's new start, Clara's courage, each a reflection of my own journey. They were my mirror, showing me a woman who'd survived, who'd grown, who'd found her place. I sipped my tea, the steam curling into the night, and let the silence wrap around me. It wasn't peace, not fully, but it was close. A stillness that felt like mine, a quiet I'd claimed. I stood in my kitchen chopping vegetables for a simple stew, the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board, steadying my thoughts, a meditative beat. I was 33 now, a year past the courtroom firestorm that had changed everything, its echoes still lingering but softer now. The apartment was small, but it was mine, filled with thrift store bookshelves and a single potted herb on the windowsill, its green leaves a quiet defiance of the urban gray outside. I'd started cooking again, not for anyone else, but for me. Each slice of carrot, each stir of the pot, a quiet act of care, a way to rebuild what I'd lost, a reclaiming of my own space. The community center had become my second home, its worn walls and scuffed floors a backdrop to the stories I now carried. I led workshops every Saturday, sitting with women whose stories echoed mine in ways that still surprised me, their voices a chorus of resilience. Last week, a young woman named Hannah shared how she'd left a job that made her feel invisible, her words halting but honest, her hands clutching a coffee mug. I listened, nodding, and when she finished, I handed her a notebook, just like the one I'd used to reclaim my dreams, its cover plain but sturdy. "Write what you want," I told her, my voice soft but certain. Her smile, hesitant but real, stayed with me, a spark that warmed the edges of my heart. I thought of Lucas, how he'd finally sat down with our father last month, their meeting a tentative bridge over years of distance. They'd talked not about Marcus or me, but about the years they'd lost to pride their voices low over coffee in a diner much like the one we'd shared. Lucas texted me after saying, "He's trying Sadie. He sees you now." I didn't need our father's approval anymore, but the words warmed me like sunlight through a cracked window, a light I hadn't expected. I'd learned to let go of needing everyone's validation, a lesson carved from years of carrying others' judgments, each one a weight I'd set down. My phone buzzed as I stirred the stew, a message from Tessa lighting up the screen. Her bookstore was opening next month, and she'd named a reading nook after me, a small corner with a chair and a lamp for stories to live. I laughed softly, picturing her arranging shelves with that fierce joy she'd found her dream no longer buried but alive. I'd helped spark that just as she'd helped me, our paths intertwined like roots under soil. The thought settled deep, a quiet pride that didn't need to shout, a warmth that filled the kitchen alongside the smell of time. I set the spoon down the pot, simmering softly, and felt my shoulders ease, the tension of the past loosening its grip. The past wasn't gone, but it was behind me like a shadow that no longer reached my feet, its edges softened by time. I walked to the window, the city's lights flickering below like scattered stars, their glow steady against the dark. My reflection stared back, a woman I hadn't known a few years ago, her outline sharper now, defined by her own choices. I was 33, and the weight of Marcus's words, "broke stupid," had faded. Not because they weren't heavy, but because I'd chosen to carry something else myself, whole and unapologetic. I'd learned that healing isn't a finish line. It's a series of small choices, like showing up for Hannah at the community center, or writing in my journal when doubt crept in, each one a step toward a life that felt true. Each choice was a brick building a foundation I could stand on, a home I'd made for myself. I thought of Mia now, thriving with her kids, her laughter a sound I'd helped bring back, and Tessa, whose bookstore was weeks from opening its shelves, waiting to hold stories. Their victories were tied to mine, not because I'd saved them, but because we'd seen each other's worth, our stories interwoven like threads in a tapestry. That was the lesson: you don't need everyone to believe in you, just the ones who matter, and yourself most of all. I'd spent years chasing Marcus's approval, bending to fit his world, twisting myself into shapes that didn't fit, but freedom came when I stopped, when I chose to stand in my own light. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I was enough. I sat at my desk, a new journal, open its pages crisp and waiting the blank space a canvas for what was next. I wrote one line, "You are enough." It wasn't for Marcus or his family, not even for the women I mentored, though they'd taught me as much as I'd taught them. It was for me, a promise I'd keep making, a vow etched in ink. The city hummed outside, steady and alive, and I felt part of it, not small, not invisible, but whole, a piece of its rhythm. I closed the journal, my fingers steady, and let the quiet fill the room, a silence that held space for everything I'd become. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was more than I'd ever hoped for, a truth I'd carry forward. What's one moment you chose yourself, even when it was hard? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join me on this journey. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're enough. Thank you for being here, for listening. Here's to finding your own quiet strength, one step at a time.